The narrative of Chhota Shakeel is inextricably woven into the fabric of a transforming Bombay, a city on the cusp of metamorphosis into a global megalopolis, yet brutally anchored in the primordial struggles of its underworld. To understand the man, one must first inhale the atmosphere of the early 1980s in the Muslim-dominated enclaves of Dongri, Nagpara, and Pendi Bazaar. This was a world apart, a self-contained universe with its own rules, hierarchies and economies. The air was thick with the scent of spices from the iconic Muhammad Ali Road, the cacophony of street vendors, and an undercurrent of simmering violence. It was here, amidst this vibrant chaos, that Shakeel Babu Miya, born in 1960, learned his first lessons in power dynamics. Unlike the flamboyant street gangsters who sought immediate recognition, Shakeel's persona was carved from a different material. He was observant, quiet, and possessed a preternatural patience. His early associations were with local toughs, but his strategic acuity soon drew him into the orbit of the most ambitious criminal mind of the generation, Dawood Ibrahim Kaskar. Dawood, himself a product of these same streets, was envisioning a criminal syndicate that operated not as a mere gang, but as a corporation. He saw beyond the crude extortion and smuggling rackets. He envisioned a diversified empire with verticals in real estate, finance, and eventually terrorism. Shakeel became the essential cog in this ambitious machine. His initial role was that of a trusted lieutenant, but his responsibilities rapidly expanded. He managed the ground operations, the collection networks, and the enforcement arm, while Dawood cultivated a Robin Hood image among some sections, distributing money during festivals and building local support. Shakeel was the reality behind that facade, the man who ensured the money kept flowing by any means necessary. The violent gang wars with the Pathans, led by the formidable Amirzada and Alamzeb, were the proving grounds. Shakeel didn't just participate, he orchestrated. He understood that this war was not just about muscle, but about intelligence, logistics, and psychological terror. He masterminded ambushes, coordinated with shooters brought in from Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, and established safe houses. His planning was meticulous. He recognized the importance of having a network of lawyers, doctors, and corrupt police officials on retainer. This period forged the core principles of the D Company under his operational command: extreme violence as a tool for business, absolute loyalty enforced by fear, and a network so deeply entrenched that it became a state within a state. The 1993 Bombay bombings, however, would represent a cataclysmic shift, not just for the city, but for the very soul of the D Company and Chhota Shakeel's role within it. This act of terror, orchestrated by Dawood Ibrahim as retribution for the Babri Masjid demolition, transported the syndicate from the realm of organized crime into the international arena of terrorism. Overnight, Dawood became India's most wanted man. With a bounty from the United States, Shakeel's role now evolved from a crime manager to a protector of a global fugitive and the operational chief of a terrorist financing network. The cataclysm of the 1993 Bombay bombings did not merely alter the trajectory of the D Company, it forged it into something far more sinister and resilient, with Chhota Shakeel as its chief architect of continuity. In the immediate, chaotic aftermath, as India reeled and the global intelligence community snapped its focus onto Dawood Ibrahim, Shakeel faced the syndicate's first existential crisis. The old Bombay-centric model was irrevocably shattered. The meticulously built network of informants, corrupt officials, and business fronts was under unprecedented scrutiny. The Pathan gang rivalry now seemed a quaint local skirmish compared to the wrath of a nation and the attention of Interpol. Shakeel's genius in this period of extreme peril was his understanding of diaspora and globalization. While Dawood became the iconic, immovable figurehead sheltered by Pakistan's inter-services intelligence in Karachi, Shakeel transformed into the mobile, agile, and indispensable connective tissue of the empire. He is believed to have first fled to Dubai, a hub already familiar to the D Company's gold smuggling operations, but soon the net began to tighten there as well under international pressure. His subsequent movements, possibly through Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, remain a subject of speculation, but his ultimate operational base, like his bosses, became Pakistan. However, Shakeel's Pakistan was not just a hideout, it was a new command center. From here, he engineered the syndicate's most critical evolution, its transformation into a decentralized, franchise-based global enterprise, no longer reliant on controlling physical territory in Mumbai. Shakeel built a model based on remote control and outsourcing. He cultivated a new generation of lieutenants, often younger, tech-savvy individuals who could operate under the radar. The old methods of Supari, contract killing, were systematized. Shakeel would receive a request, often via a complex chain of satellite phones and coded messages, negotiate the price, which could range from a few lakhs to several crores of rupees depending on the target profile, and then assign the job to a specialized cell in India. These cells were often compartmentalized. The reconnaissance team, the weapons supplier, the shooters, and the getaway driver would be different, unknown to each other, coordinated only by a single handler who reported to a number linked to Shakeel. This not only increased efficiency but created deniability. It was during this era that the legend of the call from Shakeel became the ultimate underworld currency. A film producer in Mumbai, facing a threat, would not see a local goon. He would receive a polite, chilling call directly from a foreign number, with a calm voice outlining the consequences of non-payment. This direct line to the apex instilled a terror far greater than any local muscle could. Simultaneously, Shakeel oversaw the diversification of revenue streams. Extortion from Bollywood and the construction industry continued, but was now complemented by sophisticated cricket betting syndicates that operated across India and the Gulf, large-scale counterfeit currency smuggling, key interest of the II that aligned with their goal of destabilizing the Indian economy, and narcotics trafficking. The heroin trade, in particular, became a financial lifeline, with routes stretching from Afghanistan's poppy fields through Pakistan and into India and beyond. Via the same maritime channels once used for gold, Shakeel managed these flows like a corporate CEO reviewing quarterly reports, ensuring that funds were laundered through Hawala networks so intricate that they left virtually no paper trail. The money would circle through Dubai's real estate, invest in Kenyan ivory or Southeast Asian gemstone, or be pumped into legitimate businesses in Kathmandu or Dhaka before being ready for use. His role became that of a shadowy chief financial officer and chief operations officer combined, all while living as a permanent fugitive, a ghost who wielded more power from his hidden location than most ministers do in their offices. The sustenance of such a vast, illicit empire over decades, while evading the concerted efforts of multiple national agencies, required more than just operational brilliance. It demanded the cultivation of a profound and corrosive ecosystem of fear, loyalty, and information. This is where Chhota Shakeel's psychological mastery became the D Company's most formidable shield. He engineered a culture where his name alone was a complete sentence, carrying implications of ultimate reward or unspeakable retribution. Within the organization he was not a distant boss, but an omnipresent auditor. Stories abound, whispered among lower-level operatives and senior lieutenants alike, of his almost mythical attention to detail. It is said he remembered the exact amount owed by a small-time builder from 5 years prior, or the familial details of a shooter's cousin, using this knowledge as both a carrot and a stick. Loyalty was rewarded with generational wealth, with families of imprisoned or dead company members being provided for meticulously, a practice that ensured unwavering allegiance from others. But betrayal, or even perceived inefficiency, was met with a vengeance so brutal and inventive it served as a parable for the entire underworld. The punishments were legendary, not simple executions, but graphic, symbolic acts designed to send a shudder through the network. This created a system where the fear of Shakeel's discipline far outweighed the fear of any police encounter or judicial sentence. Externally, this psychology was projected onto the Bollywood film industry, which became a stark case study of his method. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the industry was flush with black money and vulnerable stars. Shakeel, understanding the perfect mix of glamour, insecurity, and vast cash flows, made it a prime target. His approach was rarely crude. A producer or actor wouldn't be accosted by thugs on the street. Instead, they would receive a call at their private number. The voice on the other end would be deceptively calm, almost respectful, addressing them by name, complimenting their latest work, and then segueing seamlessly into a demand for funding for a new venture or a percentage of the profits. The caller would demonstrate disturbing knowledge of the individual's personal life, children's school routes, a spouse's daily schedule, a secret affair. The message was clear. Compliance was a business transaction. Resistance would be a personal catastrophe. This psychological siege was far more effective than any physical threat. It made the target complicit in their own exploitation. Framing the extortion as a form of partnership, many paid silently, writing off the losses. As a cost of doing business in a dangerous world, those who dared to protest or go to the authorities, like producer Rajiv Rai, who fled the country after threats, became examples. Yet, Shakeel also cleverly positioned himself, at times, as a mediator and arbitrator in the industry's own disputes, settling conflicts between warring producers or stars, thereby embedding the D Company deeper into the ecosystem's power structure. This duality, the protector and the predator, made him an inescapable fact of life. Beyond Bollywood, this psychological infrastructure extended to the corridors of power and the police force. The strategy was not necessarily to buy every official, but to compromise key individuals. Once compromised, through a mix of bribery and the threat of violence against their families, these individuals became assets. They provided tip-offs about impending raids, made evidence disappear, or stalled investigation. Shakeel's network of informants was so deeply embedded that he often knew of police plans before the officers executing them did. This created an environment of paranoia within the law enforcement agencies themselves, where trust eroded, and any successful operation seemed like a miracle or, conversely, a setup. This grand architecture of fear and loyalty, meticulously built and maintained by Shakeel from thousands of miles away, turned the D Company into a phantom limb of the Indian state, a presence that was felt constantly, a source of pain, dysfunction, but one that proved agonizingly difficult to locate and amputate. The operational and psychological empire overseen by Chhota Shakeel, however, did not exist in a geopolitical vacuum. Its survival and terrifying expansion post-1993 are a direct function of its deep, symbiotic integration with state-level actors, primarily Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI. This relationship transformed the D Company from a powerful criminal mafia into a hybrid state actor, a proxy weapon in a covert war, with Shakeel as its day-to-day commander. To view this alliance as a mere patron-client dynamic is to underestimate its complexity. For the EC Dawood Ibrahim, and by operational extension, Chhota Shakeel, were assets of immense strategic value. They provided deniability, funding, and an existing, ruthless network that could be harnessed for objectives that served Pakistan as security establishment, destabilizing India, financing jihadist groups, and laundering money for a myriad of covert operations. In return, the D Company received the one thing money could not buy for a global fugitive: state protection. This was not just safe haven in Karachi or upscale neighborhoods in Lahore. It was a comprehensive shield. Pakistani passports, identity cards, and secure residential compounds guarded by state security elements became their reality. More critically, the ISI's influence ensured that any serious pressure from international agencies or Indian intelligence was diplomatically stonewalled or diluted within the labyrinth of Pakistan's internal power struggles. Shakeel's role in this partnership was that of the prime executor. He became the conduit through which ISI's strategic objectives were translated into criminal terrorist action. The most glaring example is the immense counterfeit currency operation. The printing presses, often alleged to be located in Pakistan and operated with state knowledge, produced high-quality fake Indian currency notes, FAEN. Shakeel's network was tasked with the logistics, the smuggling routes through Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, the distribution networks with India, and the reintegration of the white money generated from selling the counterfeit notes at a discount back into the legitimate economy. This was economic terrorism on a grand scale, designed to undermine the Indian rupee and fund insurgency. Similarly, the drug trade from Afghanistan was not just a revenue stream, it was a weapon. The narcotics were funneled into Punjab and Kashmir, with proceeds financing separatist movements and creating societal addiction. Another form of slow burn destabilization. Shakeel managed these flows with cold precision. understanding that his empire's immunity was tied to its utility. His communication networks, funded by the D Company's vast wealth, were likely provided by or shared with intelligence agencies, making interception and decryption a nightmare for Indian agencies. Furthermore, Shakeel's role extended to being a facilitator for other terrorist groups. His networks established smuggling channels for gold and drugs, could easily transport weapons, explosives, and operatives. Indian intelligence agencies have long suspected that the D Company's infrastructure was used to support the movement of Lashkar-e Taiba, Liti, and Jaish-e-Mohammed (GM) militants into India, including for the horrific 2008 Mumbai attacks. While Dawood was the symbolic figurehead of this alliance, it was Shakeel, the master of logistic, finance, and secure communication, who made the partnership functionally viable. He ensured the ISI got what it needed: deniable leverage, funds, and chaos. In India, while the D Company received unparalleled protective canopy, this state-sanctioned impunity allowed Shakeel to operate with an audacity that would be suicidal for any other criminal. He could orchestrate the shooting of a high-profile Indian businessman in Nairobi or arrange the kidnapping of a Bollywood star's relative from London, confident that the long arm of international law would be diplomatically broken at the Pakistani border. This fusion of crime and espionage, managed by a man of Shakeel's tactical genius, created a threat that was uniquely resilient, blurring the lines between law enforcement and warfare, and posing a challenge that traditional policing could never hope to overcome. The apparent invincibility of the structure built by Dawood Ibrahim and Chhota Shakeel, buttressed by state actors and enforced by a pervasive culture of terror, inevitably bred a sense of overreach. This overreach would manifest in a series of brazen, high-profile actions in the late 1990s and early 2000s that, while demonstrating the D Company's far-reaching power, also began to crystallize a more determined and sophisticated counter-response for Indian security agencies. The empire's tentacles, orchestrated by Shakeel from his Pakistani sanctuary, were stretching in territories and domains previously considered beyond the pale of traditional underworld influence. One of the most shocking illustrations of this was the kidnapping of cricket icon Sachin Tendulkar's father, Professor Ramesh Tendulkar, in 1998. The act was not a direct order from Shakeel, but was carried out by a low-level gangster seeking to make a name for himself. However, the aftermath was pure Shakeel, understanding the colossal backlash such an act could unleash, tarnishing the D Company's carefully cultivated image and turning the nation's most beloved figure into an enemy. Shakeel is widely believed to have intervened with ruthless efficiency. He reportedly ordered the immediate and unconditional release of Professor Tendulkar, and the kidnapper, along with his associates, faced brutal, exemplary punishment. This incident revealed Shakeel's nuanced understanding of Indian society's red lines. Cricket was sacred. It showed a strategic mind capable of damage control on a national scale, but it also exposed the volatile nature of a franchise model where local operatives could act unpredictably. More direct and telling was the D Company's alleged involvement in the kidnapping of another iconic figure, music baron Gulshan Kumar, in 1997, who was subsequently murdered. Kumar, the founder of the T-Series empire, was a devout Hindu whose music cassettes fueled the cultural resurgence of bhakti, devotional songs. He had reportedly refused to pay extortion money and was seen as moving in political circles that were antagonistic to the D Company's interests. His daylight assassination was a message of terrifying clarity. No one, regardless of stature or perceived protection, was beyond reach. The investigation pointed fingers at Shakeel's network, with the shooters and planners eventually being tried and convicted. These high-profile cases, along with a relentless campaign of extortion against the film industry that saw producers like Rakesh Roshan being shot at, created a perfect storm of public outrage, media pressure, and political will. It forced the Indian state to innovate beyond conventional policing. The response was the creation of specialized units, like the Mumbai Police's anti-extortion cell, and the increased empowerment of federal agencies like the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, and later the National Investigation Agency, NIA. More importantly, it led to the leveraging of India's external intelligence agency, the Research and Analysis Wing RAW, In what became a shadow war, the Indian state began to fight the D Company on its own terms, through intelligent counter-psychological operations and leveraging international diplomacy. A key tactic was to aggressively target the financial infrastructure within India. The Enforcement Directorate, ED, began to pursue money laundering cases with newfound vigor, attaching property and freezing assets of suspected frontmen, squeezing the flow of funds that reached Shakeel in Pakistan. Another, more controversial tactic was the alleged use of covert actions against D Company operatives abroad. A series of mysterious deaths and kidnappings of mid-level D Company figures in the UAE, Kenya, and other countries in the early 2000s were widely speculated in intelligence circles to be the work of Indian agencies, a form of aggressive deterrence. This period marked the beginning of a long, silent war of attrition where Shakeel, the master of remote control, now faced an adversary that was learning to project its own power beyond its borders, aiming to constrict the very operational space he had so expertly expanded. The dawn of the 21st century and the global war on terror post 9/11 introduced a new, unpredictable variable into Chhota Shakeel's calculus: intense American scrutiny. For years, the D Company had operated in the shadows of South Asia's complex rivalries, but the attacks on the World Trade Center forced a reorganization of global security priorities, where any group with links to terrorism, especially those operating in Pakistan, came under a blinding spotlight. The United States Department of the Treasury's designation of Dawood Ibrahim as a specially designated global terrorist in 2003 under Executive Order 13,224 was a watershed moment. This was not an Indian legal filing. It was a global blacklisting by the world's sole superpower. It meant that any entity anywhere doing business with or providing service to Dawood or his network risked crippling sanctions from the United States. For Shakeel, the operational chief, this designation transformed the landscape of international finance and movement. The Hawala networks, while resilient, now faced the threat of being tracked by sophisticated financial intelligence units like FinCEN in the US. The cozy relationships with some elements in Dubai's financial circles came under strain as the emirate, seeking to modernize its image and economy, began to cooperate more with international pressure. This forced Shakeel to constantly innovate and find new, more obscure jurisdictions for money laundering, moving funds through real estate in Mozambique, gemstone trades in Thailand, or shell companies in offshore havens with lax regulation. The psychological impact was equally significant. The American designation gave unprecedented legitimacy to India's long-standing claims about the D Company's terrorist nature, elevating Shakeel from a fugitive gangster to a high-value target in a global counter-terrorism framework. It also created subtle fissures in his protective umbrella. While Pakistan's ISI was not about to abandon a valuable asset, the increased American focus meant that sheltering Shakeel and Dawood became a diplomatic liability to be managed rather than an unalloyed strategic advantage. They were perhaps moved more frequently, their communications monitored more closely by their own protector to prevent any catastrophic leaks that could lead to a unilateral American operation on Pakistani soil. Concurrently, technology, which Shakeel had initially leveraged with satellite phones and encrypted devices, began to turn into a double-edged sword. The proliferation of digital surveillance, the advent of programs like PRISM that allowed for mass data collection and improved international cooperation between cyber units meant that the old methods of communication were becoming riskier. Indian agencies, with help from allies, began to make inroads into intercepting calls, mapping networks through signal intelligence, and using cyber forensics to track the digital footprints of front companies. Shakeel was forced to adopt ever more elaborate protocols, using couriers for critical messages, employing complex code words that changed frequently, and limiting conversations to the barest essentials. This technological arms race consumed resources and added layers of operational friction. Furthermore, the nature of his criminal enterprise was evolving on the ground in India. The rise of regional satraps and newer, more localized gangs in Mumbai began to chip away at the D Company's direct control. While these gangs often still paid homage or a percentage to the company, their independence meant Shakeel's absolute authority was being diluted. The police strategy of targeting the financial infrastructure also started to yield results, making it harder to move large sums of money seamlessly. These combined pressures, global financial isolation, technological vulnerability, and local erosion, did not cripple the empire, but they forced it into a more defensive, conservative posture. Shakeel's role evolved from aggressive expansion to one of consolidation and asset protection. The flamboyant, pervasive extortion of Bollywood gradually became more targeted and discreet. The public messaging shifted. Spokesmen for the D Company would occasionally give interviews to media outlets, denying involvement in terrorism and portraying themselves as mere businessmen hounded by political vendettas, a clear attempt to manage their global image and counteract the terrorist label. This period demonstrated that even an entity as powerful as the D Company was not immune to the tectonic shifts of geopolitics, and Shakeel's enduring challenge was to navigate these shifting sands without losing the core of his power or the protection of his state sponsors. As external pressures mounted, the very source of Chhota Shakeel's strength, his deep institutional integration with Pakistan's establishment, began to reveal itself as a potential vulnerability. Subject to the volatile tides of Pakistan's own domestic politics and its fragile relationship with the United States, the sanctuary that had allowed the D Company to thrive for decades was not a static, impregnable fortress, but a shifting landscape of safe houses and patron-client relationships that could change with the whims of generals, the outcomes of elections, and the intensity of American drone strikes in the tribal areas. Shakeel's existence in Pakistan is believed to have been one of gilded confinement. He was not a free agent roaming the streets of Karachi or Lahore. He was a high-value asset, protected but also controlled. His movements were likely dictated by his handlers in the ESI, who balanced the utility of his network against the risk of exposure. This dynamic meant that Shakeel's operational autonomy, though vast in the Indian context, was ultimately circumscribed by the strategic interests of the Pakistani deep state. There were periods, particularly during the presidency of General Pervez Musharraf, under intense U.S. pressure post 9/11, when the heat became unbearable. It is widely speculated that Dawood and Shakeel were temporarily moved from their known residences in Karachi's upscale Clifton area to more secure military control zones, or even to remote locations in Balochistan or Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, to shield them from potential international raids or satellite surveillance. This precarious existence meant that Shakeel had to constantly prove his worth to maintain his privileged protection. His network's financial pipelines became even more critical as they funded not only the D Company's operation, but also contributed, through various cutouts, to the coffers of jihadist groups favored by the IIM. He became a masterful banker of terror, ensuring a steady flow of funds from counterfeit currency, drug sales, and extortion into the hands of outfits like Lashkar-e-Taiba. This role, however, tightened the noose further, as international intelligence agencies following the money trails of groups like LET would inevitably find connections leading back to the D Company's hubs, thereby reinforcing the global terrorist designation. Simultaneously, Shakeel had to navigate the treacherous waters of Karachi's own vicious gang wars, where his presence and that of other Indian fugitives was resented by local political and criminal factions. His survival depended on the IIC's ability to enforce a truce among these warring elements, task that grew more complex as Karachi descended into cycles of ethnic and political violence. Within this pressured environment, Shakeel's management style became even more paranoid and insular. Trust, always a scarce commodity, became rarer still. He relied increasingly on a small, tight-knit circle of family members and old associates from the Dongri days who had relocated to Pakistan. This reliance on kinship and decades-old loyalty, while reducing the risk of infiltration, also limited the pool of fresh talent and made the organization more predictable to analysts studying its patterns. Communication with operatives in India became a high-stakes game of chess. The once frequent calls from Shakeel became less common, replaced by more convoluted relay systems involving multiple cutouts and dead drops. The Indian police and intelligence agencies, learning from years of failure, began to successfully exploit the human element within this strained system. They turned lower-level operatives, used sophisticated sting operations to lure mid-level managers into communication traps, and patiently built watertight legal cases based on financial forensics rather than coerced confession. The 2008 Mumbai attacks, carried out by LAT but undeniably facilitated by the D Company's legacy infrastructure of sea routes and sleeper cells, brought another tsunami of international condemnation onto Pakistan in its aftermath. Even the ISI found it necessary to temporarily lower the profile of its most infamous assets. For Shakeel, this meant a further reduction in his operational tempo, a retreat deeper into the shadows. The empire was not crumbling, but it was contracting, its global reach being slowly pruned back by the shears of geopolitical necessity and relentless, patient counter-intelligence work, forcing the once untouchable operational genius into a defensive crouch, protecting a legacy while his room for maneuver steadily diminished. The gradual constriction of Chhota Shakeel's operational space and the evolution of global counter-terrorism finance mechanisms gave rise to a new, perhaps more insidious, phase of the D Company's existence, its metamorphosis into a franchise brand and a consultant for global crime, with Shakeel as its elusive chairman emeritus. This was not a diminution of power, but a strategic adaptation, a shift from direct hands-on control to a model of licensing, franchising, and strategic advisory. The old vertical empire, where Shakeel commanded every major extortion, smuggling run, and hit from Karachi, became unsustainable under the glare of international sanctions and electronic surveillance. In its place emerged a horizontal network, local gangs across India, particularly in emerging metros like Hyderabad, Bengaluru, and even in the mining belts of Odisha and Jharkhand, found value in the D Company brand. By aligning themselves with the name, they borrowed its fearsome reputation, its decade of accumulated terror. Without necessarily requiring daily instruction from Shakeel, they would pay a royalty or a percentage of their earnings for the right to use the company's name in their extortion demands, knowing that the mere mention of Shakeel or Dawood could paralyze a victim into compliance far more effectively than any local threat. Shakeel's role thus evolved into that of a brand custodian and a conflict resolver. When disputes arose between different franchisees over territory, or between a franchisee and a client, his word, delivered through a trusted intermediary, became the final arbitration. This kept him at the apex of the ecosystem without the constant operational risks. Concurrently, his expertise became a commodity for other transnational criminal organizations. The D Company's decades of experience in building smuggling corridors across the long, porous border of South Asia, its mastery of hawala, and its intricate understanding of corrupting port officials and coast guards were invaluable to entities like Iranian drug cartels, Nigerian fraud rings seeking to move money, or even Chinese triads looking for entry into the Indian market. Shakeel and his inner circle could provide logistical consulting for a fee, offering access to routes and corrupt officials without directly handling the merchandise. This consultancy model was low profile, high profit, and incredibly difficult to trace. Furthermore, the rise of cryptocurrency and the dark web presented both a challenge and an opportunity that an operator of Shakeel's acumen could not ignore. While initially wary of the digital trail, the potential for anonymized transactions and new markets was immense. It is plausible that under his guidance, younger, tech-savvy associates began to explore using cryptocurrencies for laundering and ransom payments, and the dark web for sourcing everything from forged documents to hacking tools. This modernized the syndicate's methods while keeping its core leadership at a safe, analog distance. This period also saw a calculated effort to rehabilitate the D Company's public image, at least in certain circles. Sporadic interviews given by spokesmen to media outlets emphasized their supposed philanthropic work in Karachi, portraying Dawood and Shakeel as misunderstood businessmen and benefactors of the poor, a deliberate echo of the Robin Hood image cultivated in Mumbai decades earlier. The goal was to create a counter-narrative to the terrorist designation to muddy the water for extradition efforts and to cultivate a degree of local legitimacy in their host country. This sophisticated rebranding and franchising strategy demonstrated Shakeel's enduring genius for survival. He understood that in the 21st century, The most powerful criminal is not necessarily the one who controls the most gunmen, but the one who controls the most critical knowledge, the routes, the corruption protocols, the fear-based brand equity, and the arbitration mechanisms for the underworld's disputes. By licensing terror and consulting on crime, he reduced his direct exposure while maintaining cash flows and global relevance. The empire became less a monolithic syndicate and more a decentralized, resilient network, a dark version of an open-source project, with Chhota Shakeel holding the master key to its most valuable proprietary secrets and its fearsome, enduring legend. The narrative of Chhota Shakeel, however, transcends the mere chronicle of crime and survival. It forces a profound and uncomfortable examination of the societal, economic, and institutional ecosystems that not only allowed such a figure to rise, but have sustained his legend for over 4 decades. His story is a dark mirror held up to the failures of systems, the corruptibility of power, and the complex human responses to fear and want. At its most fundamental level, Shakeel's initial ascent was fueled by the gritty socio-economic realities of Bombay's Muslim ghettos in the 1970s and 80s, a landscape of limited opportunity, political neglect, and a police force often viewed as an oppressive rather than protective entity. In this vacuum, the D Company offered an alternative ladder of social mobility for young men in Dongri. Allegiance to Dawood and Shakeel was not merely a choice for crime. It was often a perceived pathway to respect, financial power, and a form of vigilante justice that the state failed to provide. Shakeel himself was a product of this environment, and as a commander, he mastered the manipulation of these grievances. The company's occasional distribution of money during Ramadan or financial support to families of imprisoned men were not just acts of charity. They were strategic investments in loyalty and a powerful narrative of community solidarity, sharply contrasted against a backdrop of state apathy. This created a perverse moral shield, making it difficult for law enforcement to gather grassroots intelligence, as the organization was embedded within the social fabric. On a larger scale, Shakeel's empire thrived because it expertly identified and exploited systemic weaknesses in India's financial, real estate, and entertainment sectors. The pre-liberalization economy, with its labyrinthine regulations and ceilings on legitimate financing, created a massive demand for black money. The D Company, under Shakeel's operational guidance, became a shadow banker providing unaccountable cash for film productions, real estate deals, and political campaigns. This intertwined the fortunes of the underworld with those of the glittering, above-ground world, creating a vast network of complicity. Builders, producers, and even politicians who initially engaged with the network out of necessity or greed found themselves permanently entangled, their fakes becoming a leash held by Shakeel from Karachi. The institutional failure was equally stark. The chronic inability to bring him or his boss to justice, despite their notoriety and well-known aliases, has eroded public faith in the judicial and extradition processes. This failure is multi-layered. It involves alleged political patronage at various points in time, the legendary corruption within sections of the Mumbai police, the 80s and 90s which the D Company expertly cultivated, and the immense legal and diplomatic hurdles posed by Pakistan's state-sponsored protection. Each botched interception, each lost extradition request, each witness who turned hostile or was killed, added another layer to the myth of Shakeel's invincibility. This myth, in turn, became a self-fulfilling prophecy, discouraging potential informants and emboldening his operatives. Furthermore, Shakeel's story holds up a mirror to the media and popular culture. The intense, often sensationalized coverage of the D Company in the Indian press and its dramatic portrayal in countless Bollywood films have contributed to a bizarre form of celebrity. While intended to expose, this coverage often inadvertently amplified the aura, transforming gangsters into anti-establishment folk anti-heroes in certain perceptions. Shakeel, the quiet, calculating strategist lurking in the background, became an even more intriguing figure than the flamboyant dawn in some narratives. This cultural digestion of his legend complicates the social response, blending revulsion with a morbid fascination. Ultimately, the ecosystem that sustains Chhota Shakeel is a complex parasite-host relationship. The parasite, the D Company, feeds on the host's weaknesses: economic disparity, institutional corruption, political cynicism, and bureaucratic inertia. In return, it provides a dark, illegal service, quick money, fear-based resolution of disputes, and a twisted form of empowerment for the disenfranchised. Shakeel is not an aberration. He is a logical, albeit extreme, outcome of these systemic fractures. His longevity is the most damning indictment, a proof of concept that a sufficiently ruthless and intelligent entity can build a parallel sovereign system within and against the state, as long as the state's own foundations remain porous, corruptible, and unjust in the eyes of those who feel left behind. To dismantle his legacy, therefore, requires not just smarter policing or diplomatic pressure, but a painful, holistic healing of the very ecosystems that gave him life and purpose. As the chronicle of Chhota Shakeel draws towards its contemporary pause, we are left not with a conclusion, but with an unsettling open-endedness, a narrative suspended between the inexorable weight of the past and the unpredictable pressures of the future. The man who once orchestrated the street-level consolidation of Bombay's underworld now exists as a spectral entity, a name that echoes in intelligence briefings, court testimonies, and the fearful whispers of those on his radar. His current reality is one of perpetual twilight, neither fully active in his old, brazen style nor rendered obsolete. He is believed to be in Karachi, but his exact whereabouts are a closely guarded secret, even from most of his own network. His health has been the subject of periodic rumors, with unverified reports of illnesses, but nothing concrete has ever emerged to diminish the potency of his command. The protection of the Pakistani deep state, though perhaps less overt under intense international financial scrutiny from bodies like the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, remains his most critical asset. However, this protection is now a transaction under constant audit, contingent on his continued utility and his ability to avoid becoming a liability that outweighs his worth. The D Company's revenue streams have undoubtedly been impacted by global crackdowns on hawala, the increased monitoring of trade-based money laundering, and India's own aggressive asset forfeiture campaign under laws like the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, PMLA. Yet, the core competencies Shakeel honed, arbitration, franchise management, and logistical consultancy, ensure the enterprise persists, adapting like a virus to each new antibiotic. The rise of hardened, tech-native criminal groups within India, often with their own political connections, poses a challenge to the D Company franchising model, as these new entities may be less inclined to pay for a brand name when they can build their own reign of terror. For Indian authorities, Shakeel remains the ultimate white whale. His potential value, if captured alive and extracted from Pakistan, is incalculable. He's a living archive of the most sensitive secrets of the Indian underworld, its nexus with Bollywood and politics. In the 1990s, and most critically, the operational blueprints of the D Company AIC collaboration. The intelligence he possesses could unravel networks, solve decades-old cold cases, and provide unprecedented evidence for international tribunals on state-sponsored terrorism. This very knowledge makes his capture or neutralization a top-tier national security objective, but also ensures that his protectors will guard him with extreme prejudice. The personal toll of this life, spanning over 40 years in the shadows, is impossible to gauge. He is a grandfather now, separated from his birthplace by more than just geography, but by an ocean of blood and betrayal. The young man from Dongri who sought power in the lanes of Bombay has become a prisoner of his own legend, confined to safe houses, trusting no one completely. His world shrunk to a small circle, and the glow of communication screens linking him to an empire he can no longer physically touch. There is a profound irony that the man who controlled so much from afar controls so little of his own freedom. The final chapter for Chhota Shakeel could take many forms. A silent, unmarked death from illness in a Karachi suburb, forever shrouded in mystery. A violent end in a covert operation, should the geopolitical stars align in a manner that makes him expendable to his handlers. Or, the most improbable yet consequential scenario, a dramatic capture or surrender that pulls back the curtain on one of the world's most enduring criminal intelligence partnerships. But perhaps the most likely future is a continued fading, a gradual dilution of the brand he built, as new generations of criminals and terrorists develop their own methodologies, less reliant on the old godfathers. His legacy, however, is indelible. He redefined the architecture of South Asian organized crime, proving It could be corporatized, globalized, and weaponized by a state. He demonstrated that fear, when systematically administered and remotely projected, could be a more potent currency than violence itself. The story of Chhota Shakeel is, ultimately, a cautionary tale about the birth of modern asymmetric threat, where the lines between crime, terrorism, and statecraft are deliberately blurred to create monsters that are exceptionally difficult to slay, not because they are invincible, but because they are so intelligently, so ruthlessly, woven into the very fabric of the conflicts they exploit. The enduring saga of Chhota Shakeel inevitably compels a deeper examination of the human machinery that has operated beneath his command for decades: the foot soldiers, the intermediaries, the corrupted professionals, and the countless silent witnesses who form the living, breathing corpus of the D Company. While Shakeel and Dawood exist as iconic, almost mythical figureheads in Karachi, the real weight of their empire has always been borne by a vast, often anonymous network scattered across continents. These individuals, the boxers, local collectors, the supari killers, the hawala operator, the lawyers filing delaying petitions, the accountants cooking books for front companies, the film producers funneling black money, and the police constables accepting bribes to look the other way, are the true capillaries of this organism. Their motivations are a complex tapestry woven from threads of desperation, ambition, greed, fear, and in some twisted cases, a warped sense of loyalty or community. For many at the lowest rungs, particularly in the impoverished pockets of Mumbai, Uttar Pradesh, or Bihar, working for the company was not a career choice but an economic inevitability, a means of survival in an ecosystem where legitimate opportunity were scant, and the local strongman offered a semblance of order and income. They were disposable assets in Shakeel's grand design, knowing that if caught, they would face the full brunt of the law while their masters remained untouchable. Yet, the promise of financial support for their families, a promise that Shakeel's system was known to honor, provided a grim incentive for their silence and sacrifice. Moving up the hierarchy, the motivations shifted. Mid-level managers, often individuals with some education and smart acumen, saw the network as a vehicle for rapid social climbing, a way to acquire the trappings of wealth: flashy cars, apartments, political connections that would otherwise take generations to achieve. They lived dual lives, maintaining respectable public personas while orchestrating extortion or coordinating logistics for drug shipment. Their loyalty was maintained through a calculated mix of generous financial reward and the ever-present, chilling awareness of the consequences of betrayal, the stories of turncoats being hunted down globally, their bodies found mutilated as a message, a legion within the underworld, a folklore of fear meticulously curated by Shakeel. Then there are the professionals, the lawyers, chartered accountants, and even a few journalists and film personalities who willingly became enablers. For them, the association provided power, access, and astronomical fees. A senior advocate repeatedly defending known D Company operatives, or a CA creating layers of shell companies, became integral to the legal and financial firewall protecting the leadership. Their complicity was often rationalized as mere professional duty, a defense of client rights, or simply a lucrative transaction, allowing them to ignore the blood-soaked source of the money. This widespread, diffuse complicity is what made the D Company under Shakeel's operational reign so resilient. It was not a pyramid that would collapse if the tip was removed. It was a mycelial network, a fungal web spread deep within the host body's substrate. Law enforcement victories, when they came, were often against these peripheral nodes, arresting a shooter here, extraditing a money launderer from the UAE there. But for every node removed, another seemed to emerge, because the conditions that created it, economic disparity, systemic corruption, and the potent allure of illicit wealth, remained unchanged. Shakeel's most profound psychological achievement was making this network self-policing. The fear he projected was so absolute that it eliminated the need for direct oversight in most matters. An operative in Nepal knew that cheating on a consignment would result not in an angry call from Karachi, but in a sudden, violent reckoning from a fellow operative he had never met, acting on orders whose origin was a terrifying mystery. This created a system run on paranoid autopilot, where each individual enforced the rules in anticipation of Shakeel's imagined gaze. The human cost of this machinery is immeasurable. Beyond the obvious victims of violence and extortion, there are the shattered families of those recruited, the communities held hostage by fear, and the moral decay of institutions compromised from within. Chhota Shakeel, from his distant sanctuary, never had to pull a trigger on Indian soil post-1993. He didn't need to. He had built a perpetual motion machine of human frailty and ambition, a machine that continues to grind, albeit with less predictable rhythm, long after its chief engineer has retreated into the deepest shadows of his own creation, beyond the immediate sphere of crime and terror. The legacy of Chhota Shakeel and the D Company has seeped into the geopolitical calculus of South Asia, acting as both a persistent irritant and a strategic lever in the fraught relationship between India and Pakistan. The presence of Dawood Ibrahim and his operational lieutenant on Pakistani soil is not merely a law enforcement issue. It is a festering diplomatic wound, a tangible symbol of bad faith that India wields in every bilateral and multilateral forum. Every meeting between Indian and Pakistani officials, whether overt or back-channel, carries the unspoken shadow of these two men. Indian dossiers, meticulously compiled with financial trails, communication intercepts, and addresses in Karachi, are ritually presented, only to be met with predictable denial and counter-accusations from Pakistan. This stance has become a ritualistic feature of the relationship cycle that fuels mutual distrust and prevents any meaningful thaw. For Pakistan's establishment, the value of shielding Shakeel and Dawood has evolved. Initially, they were direct assets for fomenting terror and economic chaos in India. Over time, as their notoriety became a global liability, their utility has arguably shifted. They have become bargaining chips of immense, albeit negative, value. Their potential extradition is perhaps one of the few concrete concessions Pakistan could offer India in any grand negotiation, a card to be played only in exchange for something of perceived equal or greater value, perhaps concession on Kashmir, or the dialing down of India's influence in Afghanistan. This turns Shakeel, the man, into a geopolitical pawn, his fate hinging not on just, but on the unpredictable ebb and flow of statecraft between two nuclear-armed rivals. Furthermore, the D Company's sophisticated financial network, built under Shakeel's oversight, has become intertwined with the economic and political fabric of Pakistan itself. The influx of black money from its operations has, over decades, infiltrated Karachi's real estate, its stock market, and even its political campaigns. This creates a powerful domestic constituency within Pakistan that has a vested interest in the status quo businessmen, politicians, and elements within the military and intelligence apparatus who have benefited from the financial flows and would resist any action that disrupts them. This complicates any potential move by a Pakistani civilian government, should it ever muster the will to act against the duo. The syndicate's fate is thus entangled in Pakistan's own internal power struggle between its civilian government, its military, and its deep state. The international dimension adds another layer. The United States, focused on counter-terrorism in the region, has periodically pressed Pakistan on the issue, especially after events like the 2008 Mumbai attacks. However, this pressure often gets subsumed by larger strategic considerations: Pakistan's role in Afghanistan, its nuclear arsenal, its relationship with China. Consequently, American pressure has been inconsistent, allowing Pakistan to engage in a tactical deflection, occasionally placing Dawood and Shakeel under a form of loose house arrest, or moving them during periods of high tension, only to let the vigilance lapse later. For other global powers, the D Company is a regional concern, impacting stability, a volatile part of the world, thus influencing investment and strategic partnerships. The long-term geopolitical impact is a normalization of impunity. The world has, to a degree, become accustomed to the fact that two of India's most wanted men live openly in Pakistan. This acceptance, born of diplomatic deadlock and realpolitik, sends a dangerous message to other transnational criminal and terrorist entities. Find a powerful state sponsor, and you can evade global justice indefinitely. It undermines the very foundations of international law and extradition treaties, demonstrating that they are only as strong as the political will of the nations involved. For India, this enduring reality is a constant reminder of its secure vulnerabilities and the limits of its diplomatic and economic clout. It fuels a national narrative of victimhood and resilient defiance, but also of frustration. The ghost of Chhota Shakeel, therefore, haunts not just the streets of Mumbai, but the conference rooms in New Delhi, Islamabad, and Washington. He is a live wire in the complex circuit of South Asian geopolitics, a human embodiment of a conflict that remains unresolved, and a stark testament to how the ambitions of two men from the back lanes of Bombay can, through a combination of ruthlessness, cunning, and historical circumstance, come to influence the strategic equations of nations for generations. The operational and psychological model perfected by Chhota Shakeel has, in the decades since its inception, spawned emulators and inspired a new generation of criminal enterprises, albeit in fragmented and localized forms, while no single entity has replicated the sheer scale and state-backed resilience of the D Company, its blueprint remote leadership, franchise operations, diversification into legitimate business, and the weaponization of fear through technology has been studied and adapted across the Indian underworld and beyond. The decline of the D Company's direct, day-to-day control over Mumbai's streets in the 2000s created a power vacuum, but it did not erase the template Shakeel helped design. Newer gangs, like those led by Ravi Pujari, Chota Rajan's splinter group, and various factions in North India, adopted the methodology of operating from foreign shores the Gulf, Southeast Asia, Africa, while running extortion and real estate rackets back home via mobile phones and the internet. They learned from Shakeel's successes and his constraints. They saw the value of maintaining a low profile, of using digital voice calls that are harder to trace, and of investing in cryptocurrency. However, they lacked the deep, institutional patronage that elevated Shakeel's operations into the realm of hybrid warfare. Their ambitions were criminal, not necessarily geopolitical, making them more vulnerable to concentrated police action and international extradition, as seen in the capture and deportation of figures like Pujari. In Pakistan itself, the model has influenced local criminal syndicates in Karachi and Lahore, who have learned from the D Company's expertise in multi-commodity smuggling and money laundering. More disturbingly, the line between organized crime and terrorism, which the D Company under Shakeel's management's effectively blurred, has become standard operating procedure for groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. These terrorist organizations now run their own extensive criminal fundraising operations, kidnapping for ransom, narcotics trafficking, and extortion using methodologies refined by the D Company's networks. In a sense, Shakeel helped professionalize the financing of jihad in South Asia, providing a case study in how illicit finance can sustain long-term terrorist campaigns. Beyond South Asia, the D Company's legacy can be seen in the operational playbooks of transnational criminal organizations that prioritize strategic alliances with corrupt state elements and diversification of revenue streams. Mexican cartels, for instance, with their vast networks and brutal enforcement, share the D Company as corporate structure and territorial control, though on a more violent and militarized scale. Italian mafias have long used the franchise model and infiltration of legitimate business. What made Shakeel's iteration unique was its early and profound integration into an active international geopolitical conflict, setting a precedent for how criminal networks could achieve a form of quasi-sovereignty by making themselves indispensable to a state's covert agenda. This legacy is also etched into the institutional memory of law enforcement agencies worldwide. The fight against the D Company forced Indian agencies to evolve from beat policing to financial forensics, cyber surveillance, and international liaison work. It led to the creation of specialized units and legal frameworks like the Maharashtra Control of Organized Crime Act, MCOCA, which became templates for other states. The relentless pursuit of Shakeel's financial network taught a generation of investigators that following the money is more productive than chasing the gunmen. For global agencies like Interpol and the FATF, the D Company remains a textbook example of the challenges in combating terror, organized crime convergence, a case study in how traditional anti-mafia tactics fail when the criminal enjoys the protection of a hostile state's intelligence apparatus. Ultimately, the most pervasive legacy of Chhota Shakeel is the normalization of a certain kind of fear-based capitalism in the shadows of the Indian economy. He demonstrated that intimidation could be a scalable business model, that entire industries could be taxed through terror, and that this model could generate profits vast enough to buy protection and influence across borders. This dark knowledge has been internalized by countless smaller operators, creating a pervasive ecosystem of mini Shakeels operating in real estate, mining, and construction sectors across India use localized violence and political patronage to dominate markets. While they may never achieve his mythic status or global reach, they operate on the fundamental principle he mastered, that in the absence of swift and certain legal recourse, fear becomes the most efficient regulator of economic behavior. Thus, Chhota Shakeel's true monument is not a single criminal empire, but a mutated landscape where his strategies have been democratized, his methods franchised, and his chillingly effective calculus of power and fear continues to be the operating system for a significant, hidden segment of the economic and social order, proving that the ideas of a quiet, calculating man from Dongri have, for better or worse, irrevocably shaped the anatomy of power in the underworld. In the relentless pursuit of Chhota Shakeel, Indian law enforcement and intelligence agencies have been forced to pioneer unconventional and often controversial methods, engaging in a shadow war that mirrors the asymmetry of their adversaries' own tactics. This clandestine conflict, fought in the gray zones of international law and espionage, reveals a desperate struggle to counteract a figure sheltered by a state. The traditional tools of policing raids, interrogations, and standard extradition requests proved futile against a target ensconced in a military-controlled safe house in Pakistan. Consequently, a more unorthodox playbook was gradually adopted, one that targeted the human and psychological weaknesses of the D Company's vast network. One of the most persistent strategies has been the cultivation of defectors and the sowing of discord within the syndicate. The Indian agencies, particularly the Research and Analysis Wing, RAW, and the Intelligence Bureau, IB, are believed to have run long-term operations to turn mid-level and even senior D Company operatives, often by exploiting personal grievances, financial disputes, or the promise of witness protection and a new life. The most notable success in this regard was the split with Chhota Rajan in the mid-1990s, a rupture that Indian intelligence is widely speculated to have encouraged and exploited, leading to a bloody internecine war that provided a flood of actionable intelligence and weakened the company's domestic grip. More recently, the careful handling of turncoats like gangster-turned-informer Emmanuel Ahobala, who provided detail of Shakeel's direct involvement in specific extortion cases, demonstrates this patient, human-centric approach. Alongside defection, another tactic has been the strategic use of coercive diplomacy and economic pressure on third countries. India leveraged its growing economic clout to oppress nations like the United Arab Emirates, Thailand, and several African countries to crack down on D Company operations and extradite its operates. This external pressure forced Shakeel to constantly relocate his financial hubs and communication nodes, introducing friction and operational insecurity. The most dramatic and ethically debated tactics, however, are the alleged covert actions on foreign soil. A string of mysterious incidents involving D Company figures abroad has long fueled speculation about Indian agencies taking the fight directly to the enemy. The 2013 death of Dawood's close aide, Sheikh Ijaz al-Habak, in Karachi from poisoning, and the similar fate of another aide, Dawood Ibrahim, in 2015, were attributed by Pakistani media to intergang rivalry but remain shrouded in mystery. More pointedly, the kidnapping of D Company financier and key Hawala operator Mashouk Ali from Kathmandu in 2016 and his surreptitious delivery to Indian authorities was a classic intelligence operation that bypassed all legal extradition channels. Such actions, while deniable, send a powerful message that there is no truly safe haven, and that the long arm of Indian justice can manifest in unexpected ways. This shadow war also extends into the digital realm. Cyber units work to infiltrate communication channels, track cryptocurrency transactions linked to front companies, and even engage in psychological operations, leaking information to sow paranoia within the ranks, or create fake digital personas to lure operatives into revealing details. Every intercepted call that is made public, every property attachment advertised, serves a dual purpose. It builds a legal case, but it also broadcasts to the network that it is under pervasive surveillance, breeding distrust and inefficiency for the foot soldiers in India. The strategy has been to relentlessly attack the economic infrastructure using laws with stringent bail conditions like MCOCA and the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, PMLA, by attaching properties, freezing bank accounts, and targeting family member assets. Agencies aim to cut the financial sinews that connect the ground operatives to the leadership in Pakistan, making the royalty payment harder to collect and transfer, thereby straining the franchise model. This multi-pronged, unconventional campaign has not captured Shakeel, but it has arguably contained his empire, raised its operational costs, and prevented its unchecked expansion into new criminal verticals. It is a war of attrition, fought not for a single decisive victory, but for incremental degradation. The Indian state, in its quest for Shakeel, has been compelled to sometimes mirror the methods of its quarry, operating in shows, leveraging betrayal, and acting beyond traditional legal boundaries. This raises profound ethical and legal questions about the state's own conduct in combating such a unique threat. Yet, it underscores a grim reality when faced with a criminal entity that has effectively merged with a hostile state. The rulebook must be rewritten, and the battle is fought not in courtrooms alone, but in the treacherous back alleys of espionage, finance, and psychological warfare, where Chhota Shakeel first mastered his dark craft. The mythology surrounding Chhota Shakeel, carefully curated over decades through a mix of deliberate silence, terrifying action, and cultural osmosis, has transformed him from a mere criminal into a potent symbol within the collective consciousness of South Asia. This symbol carries radically different meanings depending on the viewer's vantage point, but its power is undeniable. For the Indian state and its law enforcement agencies, Shakeel is the ultimate embodiment of sovereign challenge, a living testament to the limits of their power, and a constant reminder of an unresolved wound from the 1993 bombings. He is the specter at the feast of India's global rise, a nagging anomaly where economic might and diplomatic influence have failed to achieve a basic objective of justice. His continued fugitive status is a prick to national pride, discussed in Parliament and primetime debate, not just as a crime story, but as a barometer of national resolve and international standing. Within the labyrinthine bureaucracy of Indian intelligence, he is the white whale, the career-defining target whose capture would confer legendary status, but whose elusive nature has spelled the quiet end of many promising investigations for a certain section of the populace in his hometown of Mumbai, particularly in the Muslim-dominated areas where the D Company first took root. The symbol is fraught with dangerous ambivalence. The narrative pushed by the D Company's apologists of Shakeel and Dawood as misunderstood Robin Hood figures who built mosques, distributed aid during riots, and provided a form of rough justice when the state failed still finds whispered purchase. This is not universal approval, but a complex cocktail of fear, residual gratitude for past patronage, and a cynical recognition of the power they once wielded. He is a symbol of a time when the community, rightly or wrongly, felt it had its own formidable protectors against majoritarian violence and an often prejudiced police force. This uncomfortable duality makes community cooperation with police against the D Company a sensitive, difficult endeavor even today. In the broader Indian public imagination, fed by sensational media and countless Bollywood films, Shakeel occupies a space between terrifying reality and pulp fiction. He is the archetypal shadowy mastermind, the voice on the phone, the villain, who is never seen, but whose presence is felt in every plot twist. This cinematic portrayal, while often exaggerating his reach, has solidified his image as the cerebral, cold counterpart to more volatile gangster characters, granting him a perverse form of respect for the global intelligence and law enforcement community. Shakeel is a seminal case study in the crime-terror nexus. He is the blueprint of how a traditional organized crime syndicate can be weaponized by a state actor, its financial and logistical apparatus leveraged for terrorism, creating a hybrid threat that defies traditional categorization and response. Academics and policy analysts dissect his model to understand the vulnerability of global financial systems and the challenges of extraterritorial justice. In Pakistan, where he physically resides, the symbol is deliberately obscured by state policy, Officially, he does not exist. The government's repeated denials of his presence, despite overwhelming evidence, have turned him into a ghost in the machine of Pakistan's own deep state, an open secret that cannot be acknowledged. For the Pakistani public not connected to the establishment, he is largely an abstract figure, a name from Indian headlines, his reality hidden behind layers of security and disinformation. This very invisibility within his host country amplifies his mythic quality. Perhaps the most potent symbolism lies in what Shakeel represents for the concept of justice itself. His life as a fugitive protected by a powerful state lays bare the harsh truth that international justice is often a function of power and politics, not law or morality. He symbolizes the impunity that can be purchased by utility to a nation's covert agenda. For every victim of D Company extortion, for every family shattered by the violence he orchestrated, and for the nation that endured the trauma of the 1993 bombings, Shakeel's freedom is a symbol of just delayed and denied, a raw, unfinished chapter that refuses to be closed. Yet, there is also a symbolic warning in his story, the warning of what happened when systemic failures, social, economic, judicial, persist over generation. He's a dark monument to institutional decay and the perils of allowing parallel power structures to flourish. Ultimately, Chhota Shakeel has transcended his physical self to become an idea, the idea of remote, untouchable power, the idea of crime as a corporatized, state-backed enterprise, and the haunting idea that some story, no matter how well documented, may never have a conventional ending, leaving behind only a legacy of fear, fascination, and an unresolved quest for accountability that continues to shape destinies far beyond his own. As the world moves deeper into the 21st century, the tool and technologies that once aided Chhota Shakeel's remote control are evolving at a breakneck pace, presenting both existential threats and potential opportunities for the remnants of his empire. The digital panopticon comprising artificial intelligence-driven surveillance, big data analytics, and real-time financial transaction monitoring poses the most significant challenge to the operational model he perfected. Agencies now employ AI to detect patterns in hawala transactions that would be invisible to human analysts, mapping networks by correlating seemingly unrelated data points from travel records, property purchases, and communication metadata. Cryptocurrency, once seen as an anonymous haven, is increasingly traceable as blockchain analysis firms and government agencies develop sophisticated forensic tools to de-anonymize wallets and track flows across exchanges. The very concept of secure communication is under siege by zero-click spyware and end-to-end encrypted platforms that, while secure, can be compromised at the device level. For an organization built on secrecy and the secure movement of information and money, this technological arms race necessitates a constant, costly innovation that strains even well-resourced syndicates. Shakeel, or those managing the legacy operations in his name, must now contend with a landscape where a single digital slip, a misconfigured server for a VIP call, a cryptocurrency transfer to a flagged exchange, a facial recognition hit at an airport transit lounge could unravel years of careful planning. This forces a retreat into older, slower, but more secure methods, using human couriers for critical messages, reverting to gold or gemstones as physical stores of value over digital currencies, and limiting electronic communication to an absolute minimum. Yet, technology also offers new frontiers for a criminal enterprise with his legacy of adaptation. The rise of the dark web provides a global marketplace for everything from forged passports to hacking tools, accessible from anywhere. Ransomware attacks, a form of digital extortion, could be a natural evolution for a network skilled in traditional protection rackets. Instead of threatening a film producer with physical harm, a Shakeel-inspired franchise could deploy malware that encrypts a studio's entire archive of unreleased films, demanding cryptocurrency payments for its release. The logistical expertise in smuggling could be applied to the booming illegal wildlife trade or the trafficking of critical minerals, both high-profit, high-demand global markets. Furthermore, the proliferation of deepfake audio and video technology presents a terrifying new tool for psychological manipulation and extortion. Imagine a Bollywood actor or a businessman receiving a video call that appears to be from a known associate discuss a compromising matter, only to later be blackmailed with a manipulated version of that conversation. The core competency Shakeel honed the projection of fear through information could reach terrifying new levels of plausibility and scale in the digital realm. However, capitalizing on these opportunities requires a new breed of operative, the hacker, the digital fraudster, the crypto launderer. This new generation may lack the street loyalty of the old boxers from Dongri. Their allegiance is to skills and profits, not to a person or a legacy. This creates a management challenge for the old guard. Can the myth of Chhota Shakeel, built in the analog world of blood and phone calls, command the same fear and loyalty from a coder in a Bucharest apartment or a money mule in Cyprus, operating behind layers of digital anonymity? The future of the D Company's operations, therefore, likely hinges on its ability to outsource and franchise these digital criminalities, acting as a venture capital firm and arbiter for a new wave of tech-driven crime, while its aging leadership remains insulated in their physical sanctuaries. This technological pivot also changes the game for law enforcement. The battlefield is no longer just the streets of Mumbai or the coastline of Gujarat. It is in the servers of bulletproof hosting companies, the code of smart contracts, and the dark web forums where reputations are built. The hunt for Shakeel's financial network now requires cybersecurity experts and blockchain analysts as much as it requires undercover agents and informants. In this looming digital future, the legacy of Chhota Shakeel will be tested not by his ability to command loyalty through fear alone, but by his network's capacity to innovate in the shadows of the digital world, to harness new technologies for old purposes of profit and power, while evading a global surveillance apparatus that grows more intelligent and interconnected with each passing day. The final chapters of his influence may well be written not in Urdu or Hindi, but in lines of code and in the silent, irreversible transfer of digital assets across the immutable ledger of a blockchain. Beneath the strategic analysis, geopolitical ramifications, and technological forecasts lies the profound and often overlooked human tragedy woven into the fabric of Chhota Shakeel's story, a tapestry of ruined lives, stolen peace, and generational trauma that forms the true cost of his empire. This cost is paid not in currencies or territories, but in the silent despair of countless individuals who never made headline. Consider the anonymous shopkeeper in Pindi Bazaar who, for decades, paid a monthly hafta to a local collector, a small tributary in the vast river of extortion that flowed to Karachi. This wasn't a choice, it was a tax on existence, a perpetual shadow on his livelihood, a calculation of survival made every day. His children grew up with this unspoken fear, normalizing it as a fact of life, their worldview shaped by the implicit understanding that power flows from the barrel of a gun and the whispered name of a distant dawn. Or picture the lower rung shooter, recruited from the impoverished hinterland of Bihar, given a pistol, a target, and a promise of money for his family. After the deed, he is discarded, arrested, or killed in a rival encounter, leaving behind a widow and children who receive a one-time payment from the company, a blood money that ties them to the same network that orphaned them, creating a cycle of dependency and silence. The human cost extends to the professionals ensnared in the web. A brilliant young lawyer, ambitious and initially naive, takes on a high-profile case defending a D Company operative. The fees are life-changing, but with the money comes a slow, corrosive compromise. He is asked to file frivolous petitions, to intimidate witnesses through legal maneuver, to become a part of the machinery that delays and obfuscates justice. His moral universe shrinks, his career trajectory permanently altered, his conscience a casualty of the lucrative war waged from Karachi. Then there are the families of those who stood up, the police officer who pursued a case with dogged determination, only to find his phone ringing late at night with a recording of his daughter's voice from her school playground, followed by a calm suggestion to reconsider his priorities. The businessman who refused to pay, whose factory was burned, whose partner was attacked, and who ultimately fled the city or the country, his life's work and sense of security in ashes. The toll is psychological, a collective anxiety that once permeated the film industry, where the joy of creation was shadowed by the dread of an unexpected call. Beyond the direct victims, there is a societal corrosion. The D Company's success under Shakeel's management demonstrated that the rules of the state could be systematically violated with impunity if one had the right connections and enough ruthlessness. This lesson did not go unnoticed. It contributed to a culture of cynicism, where young people in marginalized communities saw crime not as a moral failing, but as a viable, even prestigious, career path, the only institution that seemed to deliver on its promises of mobility and respect. It eroded faith in the judiciary and the police, as case after case stalled, witness vanished, and the masterminds remained untouched, sipping tea in distant drawing rooms. The trauma is also intergenerational. Children who grew up in neighborhoods controlled by the D Company's collector internalized a model of conflict resolution based on intimidation and violence. The sons and daughters of those killed in the gang wars inherited not just grief, but often a mandate for vengeance, perpetuating the cycle. For the nation, the human cost is crystallized in the memory of the 1993 bombings, the screams, the rubble, the 257 lives extinguished, and the thousands physically and psychologically scarred. Every anniversary is a reopening of that wound, and the knowledge that the chief operational lieutenant of the man who ordered it remains free is a form of continuous psychological warfare against the collective spirit of Mumbai and India. This ocean of human suffering is the starkest counterpoint to the clinical analysis of Shakeel's operational genius. His legacy is measured in the widow's quiet tears, the migrant worker's fearful glance, the businessman's forced exile, and the police officer's frustrated rage. It is etched into the nervous system of a city that learned to live with a certain kind of fear. While Chhota Shakeel may now be a ghost managing his legacy from a guarded compound, the real haunting is in the lives he and his system altered, broken, or ended, a haunting that no geopolitical resolution or technological advancement can easily dispel. A reminder that the longest shadows are cast not by empires, but by the darkness they leave within the human heart. The elusive endgame for Chhota Shakeel presents a mosaic of possible futures, each with profound implication for the criminal underworld, regional geopolitics, and the very narrative of justice in South Asia. Unlike the cinematic climax where the villain is definitively vanquished, reality offers a spectrum of conclusions, all tinged with ambiguity. The first, and perhaps most anticlimactic scenario, is a silent, unceremonious demise from natural causes in his Pakistani sanctuary. This would be a death shrouded in the same secrecy that defined his life. Pakistani authorities would have every incentive to conceal it indefinitely, maintaining Dawood and Shakeel as perpetual bargaining chips, their supposed alive status a tool to keep Indian agencies off balance and to leverage in negotiation. The D Company's franchise network, already decentralized, would likely splinter further, with various lieutenants and regional factions claiming legitimacy, leading to a period of internal strife and realignment. While this might reduce the cohesive strategic threat, it could also unleash more unpredictable, violent competition for the legacy brand, causing fresh chaos on the ground in India. A second, more dramatic possibility is a violent end orchestrated by his own protectors or rivals, should the geopolitical calculus shift dramatically if Pakistan, under immense international pressure, or in exchange for a major concession from India, or the United States decides the liability of sheltering him outweighs the benefit, he could be eliminated in a staged encounter or a mysterious accident. This would allow Pakistan to claim, without evidence, that the issue is resolved, while avoiding the politically explosive act of handing him over to India. Alternatively, a rival within Pakistan's own complex power dynamics, or a vengeful faction from India's underworld succeeding in a daring covert hit, could bring a brutal close to his story. Such an end would be messy and would likely trigger violent reprisals, but it would also shatter the myth of his inviolability, sending shockwaves through the global criminal ecosystem. The third, and from a justice perspective most consequential, scenario is his capture. This could occur through a monumental intelligence coup, a betrayal from within his innermost circle, a catastrophic error in his security protocol, or a unilateral, high-risk special forces operation by a foreign agency on Pakistani soil, akin to the Abbottabad raid that killed Osama bin Laden. The fallout would be seismic. His capture by Indian authorities would be a triumph of historic proportions, a cathartic moment for the Indian state and the victims of 1993. The intelligence haul from his interrogation would be unparalleled, potentially unraveling dozens of cold cases, exposing the full architecture of the D Company III nexus, and leading to a cascade of arrests and financial seizures worldwide. However, it would also provoke an intense crisis, with Pakistan potentially escalating to armed conflict. His trial would be the trial of the century, a global spectacle laying bare the inner workings of international terrorism and organized crime. Yet, even this just conclusion is fraught. Could any trial, any prison, ever feel like adequate restitution for the scale of suffering? A fourth, more philosophical endgame is his gradual irrelevance. As technology evolves and new criminal enterprises rise, built on cybercrime and digital currencies, the old model of the phone call Don may become obsolete. The legend of Shakeel could fade into historical curiosity, his network dissolving not through enforcement but through irrelevance, its methods outdated, its fear-based capital depleted by generations who no longer remember the source of its power. The empire would not fall with a bang, but evaporate with a whisper, its remnants absorbed into the amorphous, digital global underworld. Finally, there is the unsettling possibility of a form of grim stasis, the indefinite continuation of the present. Shakeel lives on, protected, a ghost managing a fading but persistent legacy, a permanent, open case file, a symbol of impunity that successive generations inherit. This stasis itself becomes the legacy, a permanent fixture in the troubled relationship between India and Pakistan, a lesson to all aspiring criminal empires of the durability that state patronage can provide. The endgame, therefore, is more than just the fate of one man. It is about whether a system born in the gritty lanes of Bombay, refined in the shadowy corridors of espionage, and sustained by geopolitical cynicism can ever be truly held to account. It is a test of whether the international community's principles of justice can triumph over real politics, and whether the long arc of the moral universe, in this specific and painful instant, will eventually bend towards a resolution, or remain forever frozen, a monument to the enduring power of darkness when it finds a willing shield in the machinery of the state. To truly comprehend the phenomenon of Chhota Shakeel is to move beyond the man and examine the intricate, self-sustaining ecosystem of myth and reality, that he has inhabited an ecosystem that has nurtured his power as much as he has shaped it. This ecosystem is a closed loop of cause and effect, where every law enforcement failure amplifies his myth, and every amplified myth induces further fear, leading to more failures and deeper entrenchment. It begins with the foundational myth of origin, common to many such figures, the narrative of the sharp, marginalized boy from the crowded mohalla who, through sheer intelligence and ruthlessness, outmaneuvers a system stacked against him. This story, whether fully accurate or not, provides a perverse inspirational template, making him relatable to countless other young men who feel disenfranchised, transforming a crime lord into a symbol of defiant success. Once established, the myth is fed by a consistent diet of demonstrable power, the successful execution of a high-profile extortion, the failure of a police operation tipped off from within, the mysterious death of a potential witness abroad. Each event is a brick in the wall of his legend. The Indian media, often unwittingly, becomes a critical transmission belt for this myth-making. The constant headlines: Shakeel's men suspected, call traced to Karachi, extortion demand in Star's name, however well-intentioned, served to reiterate his omnipresence and omnipotence, keeping his brand alive in the public consciousness long after his direct actions may have diminished. This media echo chamber is complemented by the fertile ground of popular culture. Bollywood films, drawing from and exaggerating real events, have immortalized the archetype of the calm, strategic underworld don based in Karachi, his face never seen, his voice a chilling whisper. This artistic reproduction blurs the lines between fact and fiction, making the actual Shakeel larger and more formidable than he might be, granting him a cultural currency that is incredibly difficult to debunk. Within the law enforcement and intelligence community, this external myth breeds an internal culture of frustration and, at times, exaggerated perception. Officers who have spent careers chasing ghosts can begin to ascribe almost supernatural capabilities to their quarry, Every unsolved crime with a potential financial motive can, in the absence of evidence, be attributed to the D Company's network, further inflating the perception of its reach. This, in turn, can lead to either paralyzing caution or ill-conceived, desperate operations that fail, thereby feeding back into the cycle and proving the myth's validity. The ecosystem is also economically sustained. A vast informal economy thrives on the periphery of the D Company's operations. The lawyers who specialize in defending its operatives, the security consultants who offer protection against its threats, the journalists who trade in leaks about its activities, and the corrupt officials on its payroll all have a vested interest, conscious or not, in the perpetuation of the myth, as their own livelihoods are tied to the specter of its power. This creates a perverse form of stakeholder capitalism around the idea of Chhota Shakeel. His physical irrelevance could threaten this ecosystem. So the ecosystem works to keep him relevant. Most critically, the geopolitical impasse provides the ecosystem's most powerful nutrient, the proof of ultimate impunity, as long as Pakistan denies his presence, and the international community accepts this denial as an unchangeable fact of political life. The myth receives its most potent validation. It demonstrates that his model of merging crime with state sponsorship is not just viable, but triumphant. This final piece of the loop makes the myth virtually unassailable by conventional means. To break this ecosystem would require multi-generational effort far beyond policing. It would require dismantling the socio-economic conditions that make the origin myth appealing, reforming institutions to eliminate corruption and inspire public trust so that myth holds no power over reality, fostering a media and cultural narrative that demystifies rather than glorifies, applying unrelenting, unified international pressure to remove the shield of state sponsorship. It is a task of societal engineering, not just law enforcement. Until that happens, Chhota Shakeel exists in this symbiotic relationship with the ecosystem he helped create, a ghost sustained by the very fear, fascination, and failure he expertly cultivates, a legend that will likely outlive the man, continuing to shape perceptions of power, justice, and possibility. In the underworld, long after his story, in any physical sense, has reached its final page, as the final words on the saga of Chhota Shakeel are gathered, we are left not with a biography of a man, but with the anatomy of a phenomenon, a dark constellation of ambition, intelligence, systemic failure, and geopolitical cynicism that coalesced into a form of power so resilient it defies closure. From the noisy, aspirational chaos of Dongri to the silent, guarded compounds of Karachi, his journey traces the evolution of South Asian organized crime from localized muscle to a sophisticated, transnational corporate terrorist hybrid. The quiet boy from the lanes became the architect of a system where fear was commoditized, loyalty was enforced with brutal pragmatism, and crime was diversified into a portfolio management strategy, all while being shielded by the very institutions meant to uphold order. His story forces uncomfortable questions about the nature of justice in an asymmetrical world where the reach of law is often truncated by the walls of national interest and state sovereignty. It challenges the narrative of globalized justice, revealing its limitations when confronted with a fugitive whose utility to a powerful military establishment outweighs the demands of international law or moral outrage. The decades-long manhunt, involving thousands of officers, millions of pages of intelligence, and countless hours of surveillance, stands as a monument to human perseverance, but also to profound frustration, a testament to the fact that in the shadowy intersection of crime and statecraft, traditional tools of justice can be rendered blunt. For the viewer who has stayed through this exhaustive recounting, the takeaway must transcend the details of extortion sums or smuggling routes. The deeper lesson lies in understanding how such phenomena are born and sustained. They are not created by evil geniuses in a vacuum. They are cultivated in the fertile soil of social neglect, economic disparity, and institutional corruption. They are watered by the silence of the complicit and the fear of the victim. They are given sunlight by the glare of sensationalist media and the romanticizing brush of popular culture. And they are granted immortality by the cold calculus of international relations, where a criminal can be redefined as an asset, and justice can be indefinitely suspended in the name of strategic depth. Chhota Shakeel's enduring legacy, therefore, is a mirror, It reflects the unfinished business of a nation's trauma from 1993. It reflects the fragility of trust in our institutions when they are repeatedly outmaneuvered by a shadowy network. It reflects the uncomfortable allure of the outlaw, who builds a parallel system of patronage and power. And for the global community, it reflects the glaring loopholes in our international systems that allow individuals accused of heinous crimes to find permanent sanctuary if they serve a powerful patron's needs. His story does not end with a verdict or a headline announcing his demise. It continues in every instance where intimidation triumphs over integrity, where black money influences a market, where a citizen feels unprotected by the law, and where geopolitics trumps the basic human yearning for accountability. The final chapter of Chhota Shakeel will not be written in a courtroom or an obituary. It will be written in the ongoing struggle to repair the fractured systems that allowed his empire to rise and to reaffirm, through relentless effort and unwavering principle, that no individual, no matter how well connected or strategically useful, can be permitted to exist beyond the reach of justice forever. The silence from Karachi is not an ending. It is a permanent question mark hanging over the conscience of the subcontinent, a quiet challenge to every ideal of law and order we profess to hold dear. This narrative has been constructed from a mosaic of open-source information, court documents, historical reports, and journalistic investigation. Our sole purpose has been to compile, analyze, and present this complex story to foster understanding. The complete truth resides in classified files and guarded memories. If this deep dive into one of the most enduring enigmas of our time has held value for you, your support is vital. Please like this video to help others find it, share it to spread this carefully researched knowledge, and subscribe to the channel. Your subscription empowers the creation of more such detailed narrative explorations of the hidden forces that shape our world. The conversation is essential. Please share your thoughts, reflections, or questions in the comments below. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your pursuit of understanding.